Hello everyone, this is Professor Reha here with the second Grim Dawn class examination for today. This is because yesterday this series slipped my mind. I meant to record it, but I didn't. I slacked off. So here's the second episode for you this fine Saturday, as an apology, to kind of catch up with the series. Now, the reason why we're skipping to the Reaper is because Andreja Potic, if I'm mispronouncing that, I apologize. But this individual asked me to cover the Reaper next, so here we are. And thank you very much for the request. I'm very glad to fulfill as many conversational suggestions as any of you care to offer. But this is a really great combination. I don't need this light on. This is an absolutely fantastic combination to play because this is one of the few combinations that can really work with the Nightblade into a nice hybrid pet build. And I'm actually going to tackle this conversation right off the top because a lot of people look at the Reaper and they don't think pets, which is a shame because you can do some pretty cool things with pets here. Now, if you're going to go into a pet anything here, you are going to be leaning into skeletons, obviously. Whether or not you go into Blade Fiend is an entirely personal choice to you. That's up to you. Please go for Reap Spirit, though. Now, the main reason for this is because when you go into Master of Death, this is just a great time, but there is a slightly heavier focus on vitality damage, while all of your pets will benefit from poison acid damage, and obviously he does poison acid damage. You don't need him. If you really want to go ham on the pets, though, go for it, but get Bone Harvest at that point as well. And if you're going to get Bone Harvest, you're going to go with this whole pet idea here, the hybrid pet with Nightblade. The best thing you can do as a Nightblade is grab Veil of Shadow, go into Night's Chill. This is going to do a couple of things for you. This is going to reduce a lot of the resistances that enemies will have to your pets. Mostly the poison acid, but there's others besides. You're also going to want to go into Spectral Wrath for the same reasons, and through this combination, this pairing of skills, you can reduce the resistances to every damage type you can do with this combination. Quite honestly, you've got the Pierce, Cold, and Poison Acid reductions here. And here, with Spectral Binding and Spectral Wrath, you've got the Physical, Vitality, and Aether. The only damage type that you're not really decreasing resistance to is Bleeding. That's it. That is all. And even then, on top of that, you can stack either Anatomy of Murder or Merciless Repertoire on top of that, even further. Now, for a pet hybrid build, which one of these two you decide on is irrelevant, because both give you some advantages. It really depends on really how far you want to go, and whether or not you're going into, whether or not you have the points from Summon Blade Fiend. But this is a marvelously fantastic time. Obviously, you're going to go all the way up to here. Obviously. But essentially speaking, which one you want to do of these is entirely up to you. You can do either. I personally have a slight preference for Anatomy of Murder because I find the plus 3% increase in my Cunning to be a little bit more useful long-term than an increase to my Retaliation damage. I don't necessarily always use this, but if you do decide to go into Merciless Repertoire, build Blade Barrier so you can just stay alive. Let's say your skeletons all die and you're being focused down by the enemies and you need time to get those skeletons back online, Blade Barrier. Get that out there. Slap. You heal. The enemies are hurting themselves on you. Night's Chill and Spectral Wrath are damaging them because they're surrounding you and basically beating their fists bloody on you. It's a magical time. If you're not going into this, though, Blade Barrier becomes a bit more of an investment because it's not really retaliating as much at that particular junction. You may instead want to go for Shadow Strike, which doesn't sound like it would make a whole lot of sense with pets, but then you realize, piercing and cold damage. Look, I happen to be reducing that here. Poison damage. Oh, look. Whoops, now we're doing vitality damage. Oh. I mean, and if you're armed with a physical melee weapon, this is doing weapon damage as well, so if you're armed with a physical or an Aether damage weapon, Spectral Wrath kicks in. If you're armed with a vitality damage weapon, Spectral Wrath. any other situation, Knight's Chill, Pierce, Cold, Poison, Acid Resistance, that's fantastic. But if you are playing pets and you are going either Anatomy of Murder or neither of these, doesn't really matter. Shadow Strike. And actually, if you're thinking to yourself, oh, but, Merciless Repertoire works with that, it does. If you want to do that, go ahead. I mean, there's really no truly wrong way of building this particular class combination. But speaking of wrong things to build, there are a couple of individual pieces that stand out as things you just really shouldn't build. And that comes down to, in fact, exactly one thing. Nether Edge. With this particular combination, Nether Edge is the only skill here that I'll argue you don't need. Now, the rest of Phantasmal Blades is fantastic, especially if you go into Frenetic Throw, because your piercing damage is being converted to vitality damage, and if you're going with Harbinger of Doom, that means more damage, not less. As opposed to this, which does less damage. No, actually, if you're building Harbinger of Souls, and you are converting your piercing damage from this into vitality damage, guess what? Your total damage is probably going to go up in the long run as you boost up your vitality more, because I'm also going to make the assumption that if you're boosting your vitality and you're doing bleeding with Heartseeker, you're also building Anatomy of Murder, you've got Harbinger of Souls on top of that, you have Siphon Souls with Blood Boil, which, by the way, is boosted by pretty much everything you do. Especially, this also is increased purely by Anatomy of Murder as well, so that's a good time. And then you're probably going into this as well. Well, maybe not. That really depends. But this, going up to just Heartseeker is fine, but you're almost never going to see justification for Nether's Edge. You don't enhance chaos damage, you don't deal chaos damage, and frankly, it's never going to get enough chaos damage to justify. Oh no. I do 125 to 156 chaos damage per knife throw. I happen to throw... Oh, how many knives is it? What is it at max? 5? 6? 5. I throw 5 knives. Oh, that's 500 chaos damage. Ooh. I don't do anything else with this. It's just... And the cold damage itself is also not really worth it a lot of the time. Because if you are building, you're going to be throwing these knives, and that means you're not really going to be seeing results from Knight's Chills. The cold damage isn't really going to help you here. And if you're building Merciless Repertoire, this is the only part of that that's going to be benefiting from Merciless Repertoire, because this part here, Heartseeker and Phantasmal Blades, benefits from Anatomy of Murder. So, I almost never build Nether Edge, but that's the only part of this combination that stands out as being very dysfunctional compared to the rest of the build. And if you have items that increase Nether Edge, or that converts chaos damage into vitality or cold or pierce or whatever, that's fine. But as it stands now, again, ignoring all equipment, Nether Edge is a completely different conversation. That's just, you almost never will want to use this. Everything else, fantastic. Blade Spirit, piercing cold bleeding damage. There's no build that can't use this. Nether Edge, nothing wants this. I don't know of any non-specific builds that use this with this combination. Now, are there items out there that would allow this to be useful? Absolutely. They're out there. I'm sure they are. Monster and Frequents, probably. Do I know them off the top of my head? No. Do they exist? Very likely. Do I care? No, and neither should you. You should not be going out of your way just to incorporate Nether Edge into either of these when everything else in this combination works really well. It makes no sense. Ignoring this weird tangent I went on, you have a lot of other options. As I said, Phantasmal Blades up to Heartseeker with the Frenetic Throw attached benefits entirely from Anatomy of Murder, as does Siphon Souls with Blood Boil. So that's fairly fun times. In fact, most everything you can theoretically get out there and throw at the enemy is going to benefit in some way. It really depends on how much cold damage you want to do, how much vitality damage. There is a large amount of variety you can pull off here. Just absolutely huge amounts. Now again, I have a personal weakness for Ravenous Earth, but then with this combination you can enhance either the vitality or the poison damage. It works really well. There is a slight preference for vitality. I'll freely give you that. That's absolutely true. But it doesn't really make a difference. You can go into, either of these two and absolutely pull off some fantastic damage output. And you're probably wondering, well, why are you talking so much about these two? Because even if you're not necessarily focusing your build around one of these two, they will heavily influence the skills you are picking, or you are picking these because of a specific build you're looking to accomplish. So, you will want one of the two of these. You probably won't be wanting both. That's a little bit intensive on the skill points. I apologize if you just heard a noise. That was me elbowing my mic through awesome talent. But you will be wanting to build one of the two of these. If you wanted to talk about skills that you are always going to want to sit down and consider, obviously Spectral Wrath and Spectral Binding. No matter what build you're playing, this is great. I'm actually going to switch over to Nightblade and re-emphasize once again the Night's Chill. Again, just always fantastic regardless of what you're doing. Either one of these will benefit your build no matter what you're building. It doesn't matter. These are fantastic. Besides that, I have a particular fondness for Drain Essence, specifically with Grave Chill, because if you're going with the Poison-Cold combination, you're converting that Aether damage to Cold, and it works really well. If you're focusing on the Vitality, leave the Aether damage alone. Just go with Drain Essence. It's fine. And for this particular combination, Siphon Souls. Again, this is just generally going to be really good. I say this though, but honestly, Ravenous Earth I think applies a little bit better. Thinking about it for a brief second, because again, you're doing Poison, Acid, and Cold, or Vitality and Bleeding. Generally speaking, these aren't your only options, but these are the broad strokes of what your build is going to be looking like. And this will benefit either of them, and it does percentage of health damage. At this point, it reduces all the enemy's resistances, it reduces their damage output. It's always a wonderful time. Furthermore, a lot of these skills can benefit your allies as well, in some way. Spectral Wrath is reducing enemies' resistances, which helps your allies for the obvious reason. Same thing with Night's Chill. Ravenous Earth is decreasing the damage and resistances of enemies, so that's really going to help them out. Some other things you will want to consider with the Nightblade is, again, Shadow Strike. This is fantastic. Doesn't care about your allies, but then who does? This is really nice. All the way up. You get some healing here. You're doing all kinds of damage that's going to be boosted somehow. You're somehow boosting this. And then, of course, Pneumatic Burst. The healing is never a bad thing. The increase in speed, even if you aren't using attack speed actively, it's still nice to have the increased running speed, the health regeneration, go up to Shadow Dance if you really want to, get some dodging in there that reduces you being hit. That's always a good thing. I don't always go into Elemental Awakening. It depends on how hardcore I want to get into that ice damage, that cold damage. If you're going into cold damage, Elemental Awakening is a good choice. Otherwise, leave it alone. You really don't need it. Yes, there's elemental resistance there, but elemental resistance occurs so commonly in equipment that honestly you aren't likely to see this mattering much. There will be certain instances, like when you jump up a difficulty, where Elemental Awakening will really pull its weight, but beyond that, no. So these are the skills that I would sit down and at least always consider including in a build, regardless of what that build is. They're fantastic abilities for this particular combination, and I've never regretted building any of those. Now, you could also go with an extremely heavy default weapon attack setup here, and that's a fairly interesting time. Now, if you're going to go into this, interestingly enough, you're still going to want to go into these, just increase pretty much every damage type you do, but you are probably going to lean a little bit more into a Merciless Repertoire here, because these do have a tendency to do more along the lines of Poison, Acid, and Cold damage, rather than Vitality and Bleeding. In fact, I think there's only one Bleeding among these. Piercing, where's the Bleeding? Pretty sure there was Bleeding somewhere lying around here. Where's the bleed? There's the bleed. Yeah, there's the only bleed here, so there's not really a whole lot of bleeding going on here. I tend to build Shadow Strike with this because this will get me to the particular target I need. And also, I do tend to build Ravenous Earth to wipe out groups of enemies, although if you wanted to go with Siphon Souls instead, that is perfectly acceptable. That's a really strong pick. Or you could go, if you really wanted to go into Harbinger of Souls. I actually don't often go into Harbinger of Souls when I'm going with a full auto build, or a full default weapon build. But Shadow Strike is really good to get you to your targets, as you do. And Amrasta's Blade Burst is also a really great option for taking out groups of enemies, and also increasing a lot of your primary damage types using Lethal Assault. So that's a really great way you can get about doing that, especially since if you're using this particular setup and you do decide to go into Amrasta's Blade Burst, you can stop leveling your Necromancer at 15 and spare all these points for more Nightblade skills if you want to. You could be going into Phantasmal Armor, and additionally Pneumatic Burst, or Blade Barrier for some health regeneration. Maybe you want to go into Phantasmal Blades for some additional range, and just go up to Heartseeker. Again, pretend Nether Edge doesn't exist. Totally up to you. You've got options. You've got tons of options here. And that's also with default weapon attacks. You have all kinds of different things you can do here. For example, if I really didn't want to go into dual wielding, I could go into Amrasta's Blade Burst, slap in Ravenous Earth, drop these, slap Ravenous Earth in there, maybe I get in some nice Drain Essence with some Grave Chill, and then I go into some Shadow Strike, you know, slap some fools, Shadow Strike the guy. I mean, you really can't go wrong here. Maybe I'm really dedicated to the glorious art of smacking people with knives at a distance. Alright, Anatomy of Murder, boom, Heartseeker, Phantasmal Blades, Frenetic Throw. I'm gonna boil your blood, because that's just delicious. We're gonna go ham on this. You know, we've got all kinds of things. Maybe I still want to go into dual blades. Maybe I don't. Maybe I still keep Shadow Strike. At this point, the world is your oyster. Like I said, there's really no wrong way of building this if you just try to coordinate. That's all you really got to do. Make the effort. And even then, you've got so many great ways of reducing enemies' resistances that you can absolutely lay the smackdown on pretty much anyone that comes within arm's reach of you. Especially if you're melee. Now, that does bring out an interesting point. Although there aren't a whole lot of options when you're ranged, obviously Night's Chill and, to some extent, Spectral Wrath won't really be as useful ranged. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist or cannot work. Go ahead and try it if you want to. Find your own unique build. It's an absolutely glorious time. But for this combination, it's absolutely fantastic. I could go theoretically all day about various very specific builds and the glories of these. An interestingly fun time, if you really wanted to, was go max out all of these, right? Max these out, go into Siphon Souls, Blood Boil, and Reaping Strike. Now what this achieves, and yes, by the way, ahead of time, there is enough skill points for this, what this achieves is the ability to heal regardless of what the situation is, especially if you go into Harbinger of Souls if you really feel like to. You can drain groups of enemies with Blood Boil, or you can just drain them with Reaping Strike, which triggers surprisingly often. And then just absolutely smack down whoever with these, and small groups even with some of these, like, where is it? Belgothian's Shears hits groups of enemies. So you can have an absolute field day with that. But that is the Reaper. There's no wrong answer here. There's all kinds of fantastic things you can do here with this combination, and give it a try. If you wanted to build a hybrid pet build, this is one of the classes to do it with. This is fantastic. There's just so many different ways. All you really have to do is sit down and say to yourself, well, I feel like doing this kind of damage combination today. Go and do it. This build will give you whatever you need. This combination will give you whatever you need. So that being said, thank you all very much for listening and watching. If you have any other comments, questions, concerns, ideas, or suggestions, if you want me to talk about a piece of equipment that lends itself to specific builds, I can absolutely talk about those builds in the context of that weapon, or other builds. I'll eventually be running through all of these. And shout out again to Andreja Potic, again, if I'm mispronouncing your name, I'm sorry, for the comment and the suggestion. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed. And to everyone involved, which is all of you watchers, have a great 24 hours.